Hello, and welcome to Perfectly Seasoned, the podcast about all things culinary. I'm your personal chef, Greg Strom. Mr. French, Mr. Belvedere, Benson, Geoffrey, Carson, and of course the most famous of all, Alfred, all had one thing in common. Can you guess what it is? Stay tuned. Well, welcome back to Perfectly Seasoned after a brief hiatus. Today's show is going to be really fun. I'm speaking with a very good friend of mine who is a 20th century personal butler. And the profession dates back to ancient times. The butlers of the day during the Roman period were trusted slaves who were put in charge of taking care of earthenware containers that had the wine for their masters, and they were in charge of taking care of it because they were considered assets along with the wine. The modern role of the butler has evolved from earlier roles that were generally considered to be only caring and serving for alcoholic beverages. Well, that's far from what happens today with the butlers of the 20th century or 21st century. There have been some adjustments made with the duties and the responsibilities, but they over the years, the modern butler has pretty much remained the same, except the responsibilities have come into the 21st century. Today, I have a good friend of mine who happens to be a personal butler, and his name is Richmond Schmidt, and he's been working as a butler for a family for a number of years, and I thought this would be a great podcast because I have so many questions. So, first of all, I want to say welcome, Richmond.
Hey, Greg, thanks. It's great to be here and on your show today with you.
Well, we've known each other for a number of years now, and we've entertained together because you throw some really kick-ass parties, I got to tell you. And
thank you.
And it's always fun to help you in the kitchen. I wanted to talk today about the profession of the butler, and I know that you have studied to become a butler. You went to a butler's school. Where did you go to school for that?
I went to the International Butler Academy, which is located in the Netherlands.
How long does it take to graduate?
I would first add there are a number of schools around the country and around the world, some in Australia, Canada, several in the United States, South Africa, as well as the International Butler Academy in the Netherlands, and of course, as you would expect, in Great Britain. All the courses seem to run the same period of time. They are typically about 2 months long of intense training, and quite often can involve, as in my situation, a 6-month internship after graduation. So that's not always mandatory, it's not always offered. In my situation, that was part of my training. So it was 2 months of intense classwork at the academy, followed by 6-month internship in Palm Beach, Florida.
Well, is that through the school's placement service? I'm assuming they must have some sort of a placement service, or do you have to find your own internship?
Most schools might have something affiliated with them as far as an internship program and or a placement program, though that's not always guaranteed. It's just like a college education, they give you the diploma and then send you out on your way. I was very fortunate that I did end up with an internship, which turned into a full-time job after that. So there were some very smooth transitions for me as far as getting into the career.
Well, what are some of the course requirements? What are some of the things that you had to study in the curriculum there?
Right. As mentioned, it's a relatively short program compared to some other vocational schools that are out there. However, it is extremely intense, and there is a lot covered. We had a number of instructors from across the world that taught different topics such as first aid. We were certified with the Red Cross. We all had to show that we had competent skills in first aid and CPR. We talked about home security. We practiced things such as ironing, making beds, folding linens, tying bow ties, polishing silver. We talked about etiquette and protocol. We actually practiced serving at the table. We worked on party planning. We did some menu planning and some bartending, practicing skills that you would expect and some that you wouldn't expect. We practiced helping people get in and out of cars.
Oh, really?
We practiced seating charts. Yes.
In 2020, for example, what does the modern butler, what is expected of a modern butler?
This is an extremely traditional career with a lot of fixed expectations, a lot of history behind the career. But your question is very timely because a butler is also today expected to be edgy and avant-garde, you could say. We talked a little bit at school about the green butler. Butlers today need to be very concerned about recycling. If you're working in a large home, you can imagine the amount of recyclable waste that could very easily get pushed aside and just disposed of in conventional manners. Today, the green butler is going to be asking, how could I set up a recycling program in this large home? And how do we clean with green products? How do we clean with things that are biodegradable, less harsh chemicals on fabrics and hard surfaces, and easier to work with, safer to work with? Butler also today has to be very savvy as far as almost an IT specialist, able to understand different programs in the home as far as audiovisual, music throughout the home, security systems within the home. These are things that the butler of the Downton Abbey wasn't as concerned with.
I guess you don't have to worry about pulling that little chain that comes down and rings a bell in the servants' quarters.
No, that there's still a way to communicate, and if that system fails, it's always the butler that's turned to. I remember quite vividly watching Downton Abbey, and it was the scene or the section of the program where a telephone was introduced to Downton Abbey. And everyone looked at this candlestick brass telephone, wondering, where does it go? What do we do with it? And it was almost introduced as a nuisance and not a welcomed friend into the Downton Abbey. It was left upon the butler, the head of the household, to house it in his office and to manipulate how this was now going to be used and implemented within the framework of the existing household. So that was the beginning of IT for the butler.
And of course, now everything is done by text.
Exactly. So
well, you brought up an interesting thing there: the household management. Is the butler basically the household manager today? I mean, I know. Let's say in Downton Abbey, for example, there were a number of people in the employee of Downton Abbey, and the butler was I guess he must have been the head of all of the employees, and then there was the housemaid. So in today's butler situations, do you have a staff, or are you the only staff? Do you take on the jobs of other people if you are the only person, or how does that work?
The answer is yes, in varying degrees. In the time of Downton Abbey, it didn't show this very much, but there were a couple episodes where there was mention of an estate manager. The estate manager at that time, in that particular situation at least, was managing the farmhand and all the property and the workings of the actual workings at the estate. So he was also in a very managerial position, and probably was paid more than the head butler, and had probably more management responsibilities. The butler, in the case of Downton Abbey, had some specific responsibilities related to just the running of the household, not the overall property. So there's a little bit of that goes on today. The butler definitely will always have management responsibilities, but is not always the top of the pecking order. In some of the larger estates today, and some of the larger homes that are being managed, there's actually an estate manager who has two basic responsibilities that could be defined as controlling the workings of the physical workings of the house, being responsible for things such as the heating and cooling systems of the house, the security systems of the house, and then the responsibility also extends to the staffing of the house. So there's a lot of HR that goes in there. Under that person, usually, typically, is the butler, who has more of a hands-on experience with the principals of the household and the other staff members. And it's more of a one-on-one relationship with the principals rather than a one-on-one relationship with the heating and the cooling system or the security system.
Oh, I see. So the estate manager would be sort of like the operations director, and the butler would be a department underneath the operations manager.
Pretty good, yes. That's in some homes. That's in the larger homes with very traditional staff. And I've worked in several homes like that there were at least 16 full-time staff people that worked under me, and that there was one estate manager who worked over me. So I did have responsibilities for those under me, but I also had someone to whom I answered within the household as well. There are other households where the butler also acts as the estate manager. And in a much smaller situation, such as one that I'm intimately familiar with now, is the butler acts as a major domo. And a major domo is one person who has basically full charge of the entire household. And sometimes that would entail having some assistance from a couple housekeepers, maybe a gardener. You could outsource services such as pool care, landscaping, security systems like that. But the butler has overall responsibility of the entire house. There's no estate manager involved. And there's still some very traditional butler responsibilities where there's one-on-one interaction with the principals and with the staff.
I want to go back to your training a little bit. I know the training had to be rigorous. I went to their website, which is absolutely fascinating to watch. It's quite an amazing time that you're there. That even though it's a relatively short period of time, it seems like the days never end. When you're there, were there any class rankings or honors at graduation? Like valedictorian or any of or how does that work? Does everybody get the certification or the certificate, or do some people drop out? I mean, are there people who just don't cut the mustard, as they say?
There are some people that don't cut the mustard, and they're either asked to leave or they willingly end the program and leave before it gets any worse for them. But yes, for those that graduate, you can simply graduate, or you can graduate with the highest level, which was to graduate with distinction. And that, of course, is the coveted position. But just to graduate is honor enough as well.
What are some of the qualities that you need to really be a successful butler today?
that's where we probably fall back into the lines of what is most traditional for a butler. And to be a butler, I think you need to have a lot of forethought. You have to have a sense of anticipation for what could possibly happen in most situations. You, above all, need to be discreet. And whenever I'm working with clients, I always think that one of the strongest responsibilities that I bear is for that to maintain their privacy. And that's not only their privacy within their own home and the staff that is working around them, but also privacy outside the home and what is said, what is mentioned, and what is protected of their privacy in public. Most butlers that I know would never think to ask who somebody works for. We might talk about our jobs. We might ask for household hints. We might look for suggestions from each other. But very rarely, if ever, do we discuss the people for whom we're engaged at the moment. So
it's definitely not water cooler conversation.
it's just not kosher that you would talk about your principles in any sort of way that would violate privacy or the security of the household.
Well, one of the questions that I have, because I know you're a fantastic cook. Your parties have become legendary, and so have your dinners, especially your theme dinners. They are legendary. But as far as the cooking goes, what sort of training do you have to take? Any training at the school for cooking? Or?
No, actually, in all honesty, the cooking aspect of that is underplayed. And I can say that most butlers do have an interest in the kitchen and have on their own honed in on some cooking skills and enjoy working with food, of course. It seems to be of interest to most butlers. However, it's downplayed a lot in the butler profession, because if you want to be a chef, then you go to chef school and you graduate as a chef. If you want to be a butler, you go to butler school and become a butler. The tendency is for a lot of homes to engage a butler and expect him or her to do some cooking. And a little bit of cooking is fine. Most butlers can rise to the occasion and put out a souffle, especially if they were to watch your program and learn with ease how to put out a beautiful souffle like you did your last program. But the problem is that can become a full-time job in itself then, which robs the butler of his other duties, and she or he can't perform all that he or she was trained to do. So the job then morphs into that of a cook and or of a chef. So it's really downplayed and it's not encouraged.
Well, you say he or she. That brings up a question that I hadn't thought about. But did you have any female classmates in your class? Because I know, according to I forget the gentleman's name from the British Butlers Institute, he was quoted as saying half of all the students in training are females. Now, I've not thought about. I don't know why. I guess it's because we're so used to thinking of the butler as a male, but there would be no reason that I guess a female would not be just as adequate.
Exactly right. Traditionally speaking, they were always male positions, but today males and females enter the profession, and both serve the role equally well.
Well, I suppose it might be more advantageous with some employers, depending on their situation, to have a female butler as opposed to a male butler, and vice versa.
Exactly.
Does the modern butler, are they also drivers? Do they travel with your clients? Or?
That can be an expectation within your role within a household. I have driven for employers before. I have traveled with employers before. either to other homes that they own or as part of their family vacations. Again, in a larger, more traditional home, which still exists today, there is the position of chauffeur. And that person in particular, not to get on another profession, but that person also would act as a security agent as well. So a lot of times they're packing heat. I do know some butlers that
I'm sorry, Richmond. I can't see
that as well.
I just can't see you packing heat. I'm sorry.
That's part of the mystery. You don't know whether I do or not, do you?
Well, I'll always have to think about that from now on.
You may want to pat me down next time.
Well, one of the other things that I was reading on the website for the International Butlers Academy, the salaries, people want to know how much butlers make. Well, from what I gathered, the salaries can range anywhere from like $50,000 up to six figures. And one of the interesting things is Gary Williams, who is, I guess he's the head of the British Butler Institute, said that the highest paid butler in the world is reported to be bringing down $2.2 million annually. And I guess somebody asked him who it was. And of course, going back to your point about absolute discretion, he wouldn't divulge who it was, but he did mention the fact that he did work in the USA. So, so tell me, are you making $2.2 million? I'd like to know if I should ask for a raise the next time I come to work a party at your house.
Yeah. That would not be this particular butler, but
No.
your other numbers are fairly accurate as far as the spread of salaries that are out there.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize what hard work this type of service is. It's the same as any being a chef, a personal chef. It's very time consuming. It's very arduous. It can be. It's also, I think, if I had to choose the thing that is the most difficult in my profession, for example, as a personal chef, I think it's probably anticipate the needs of a client. It's almost like you have to be in their head 24 hours a day to think about what they're going to ask you to do next. Is that accurate?
I think it's identical, yes.
And do you find that you have to be very agile in how you determine what your next step is based on their mood at the present time?
Right. As I mentioned earlier, I think one of the prominent character traits of a butler is discretion. But another valuable trait to have in your bag is flexibility, and to be able to adjust. You can have the best intentions and you can try to plan and have the forethought that's needed, but you're dealing with people like you and like I who we change. One day we might like this. The next day we've decided we're tired of tomato juice. We've had enough of it. So you need to be prepared to make those adjustments, and people's schedules change. People of wealth have the ability to cancel at the last minute well-planned trip that took weeks or months to plan, and lots of moving parts that all of a sudden get changed at the last minute. And then they're expected to stay in the household longer than you had anticipated. So now you've got to rearrange everybody's schedule, the vacation time that was planned, and the food that was not prepared because they were leaving the residence. All of this requires a great deal of flexibility and patience.
I dare say you are well suited for your profession, because I know for a fact you're an extremely patient and very considerate person.
Well, thank you, Greg.
And
that's kind of you.
It's a characteristic I wish I had. I have to really work very hard at it. It seems more natural for you. But I want to find out, have you been back to the school to visit it all? And is there Do they have like class reunions and things? I mean, I would imagine.
I've been in close contact with most of the other students with whom I graduated, but we have not gone back and scheduled a reunion of sorts. But I suppose that could be coming up. It's now been 17 years. Maybe at year number 20 we might schedule a grand reunion.
You answered my next question. I was going to ask you how long it's been since you graduated and since you've been a butler. So I didn't realize it was 17 years. That's
I didn't either till I stopped to think about it. So I'm feeling rather dated at the moment, but thank you.
Well, I would love to be able to do a YouTube series of videos with you and on planning a dinner party from soup to nuts. Well, that could be it, from soup to nuts.
There you go.
And everything from planning the guest list, like invitations, planning, because all of these things I know are things that you as a butler have to have in your arsenal of tools. So, like everything when choosing the wines, setting a proper table, which as you know, you and I are very much alike like that. And it's, how to clear a table the right way, how to what is the proper etiquette for even sending out thank you notes after a dinner party or a party, things like that. I think that would be a fabulous, we'd have to do it in maybe a 3 or 4 part series, but I think I'm going to tap you to do that.
Gladly, I'll look forward to that. Greg.
Well, I've posted some informative links on the website, thesilverchef.net. What else? And you can listen to the podcast on my website and also on iTunes and Spotify. And please like and subscribe. And you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Perfectly Seasoned Cooking Boot Camp. And you can follow me on Facebook at The Silver Chef. And I'd really like to thank my special guest, Richmond Schmidt, for taking the time to speak with me today, because this is a conversation that I've wanted to have with you for a long time, and I'm glad you were willing to share it with listeners. So thank you so much. And until next time, this is Greg Strom, hoping all your days will be perfectly seasoned.